Keanu Reeves stood in the marble lobby of his own billion-dollar company, and he was completely invisible. He wasn't invisible because of magic. He was invisible because he was wearing a 10-year-old coat, a knit beanie pulled low over his ears, and boots that were covered in dust. To the people rushing past in their $2,000 suits, he looked like a delivery driver, or perhaps someone there to fix the air conditioning. Inside the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor, the executives were popping champagne corks, laughing loudly, unaware that the man they were toasting to deceive was standing 12 floors below them. 7 minutes later, Keanu would walk into that boardroom. He wouldn't raise his voice. He wouldn't scream. But with just a few quiet words, he would burn their entire world to the ground. But to understand why he did it, and the brutal lesson he taught them, you have to understand exactly what happened in those 7 agonizing minutes of waiting. Keanu took a breath, tasting the recycled, conditioned air of the lobby. It smelled of lemon polish and arrogance. He shifted the weight of his old leather satchel on his shoulder. He wasn't here as the Hollywood star. He wasn't here as the action hero. He was here as the majority shareholder of Paragon Studios, a company he had quietly funded 6 years ago to be a haven for artists. He owned 53% of the stock, held in a blind trust. He had handed the keys to a team of men he thought were experts, men he thought had integrity. But the numbers didn't lie. Profits were up, but morale was destroyed. Good people were quitting. There were whispers of a sale he hadn't authorized. So, he had come to see the truth for himself, disguised as a nobody. He walked to the reception desk. It was a massive, imposing slab of white stone that looked more like a barricade than a welcome center. Behind it sat a young woman, her name tag reading, Tiffany. She was furiously typing on her smartphone, her long acrylic nails clicking against the screen like hail on a tin roof. She was frowning, completely absorbed in her digital world. Keanu stood there. He waited. 1 second. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Tiffany didn't look up. She didn't acknowledge the presence of a human being standing 3 feet away. "Excuse me," Keanu said. His voice was soft, raspy, the voice of a man who had been traveling. Tiffany let out a long, dramatic sigh. She finished typing her sentence, hit send, and then, with agonizing slowness, raised her head. Her eyes didn't meet his. They scanned him. It was a cold, clinical assessment. She looked at the beanie. She looked at the fraying collar of the leather jacket. She looked at the dust on his boots. Her lip curled slightly. It was a look Keanu knew well. It was the look society reserves for those it deems irrelevant. "Deliveries are around the back," she recited in a monotone voice, already looking back down at her phone. "Go out the main doors, turn left, ring the gray buzzer. Security will let you in when they have time." Keanu didn't move. He rested his hands on the cold stone of the desk. "I'm not here for a delivery," he said gently. "I'm here to see the executive team. Julian Sterling and his board." Now she looked up properly. Her eyes widened, not with recognition, but with incredulity. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "The executive team," she repeated, mocking him. You want to walk in there looking like that and see the CEO? Do you have an appointment?" "No," Keanu admitted. "I don't have an appointment." "Then you have 2 choices," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a harsh, conspiratorial whisper. "You can leave, or I can call security to help you leave. We don't do handouts here, we don't buy whatever you're selling from that bag, and we certainly don't have time for fans who got lost on the way to the Walk of Fame." Keanu held her gaze. He saw the impatience, but he also saw the fear. The fear of stepping out of line. The fear of letting the wrong kind of person into the sanctuary of the rich. She was a symptom of the disease, not the cause. "I'll wait," Keanu said simply. "You can't wait here," she snapped. "This area is for clients. Important clients. I'll wait over there." Keanu gestured to a row of hard plastic chairs near the fire exit, far away from the plush leather sofas in the center of the atrium. These were the seats for the invisible people, the messengers, the cleaners, the applicants desperate for a job. Fine, she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Sit there. But if you make a scene, or if you bother any of the guests, you're out. And don't expect coffee. Keanu walked to the plastic chair and sat down. The material was hard and cold. He crossed his legs, folded his hands in his lap, and did what he did best. He watched. Time seemed to slow down. For the next few minutes, he witnessed the culture of his company in raw, unfiltered motion. And what he saw broke his heart. He saw a vice president, a man in a navy suit that cost more than most people's cars, storm through the front doors. He was screaming into his phone, his face red with rage. As he passed the reception desk, he didn't nod at Tiffany. He snapped his fingers at her without looking and pointed to the elevator, a silent command to hold the door. She scrambled to press the button, looking terrified. He saw a group of 3 marketing directors walking together, laughing loudly about a weekend trip to Cabo. A janitor, an elderly man with a slight limp, was on his knees near the elevator bank, scrubbing a scuff mark on the marble. As the directors walked past, they didn't step around him. They stepped over his legs. One of them actually brushed the janitor's shoulder with his briefcase, knocking the man off balance. The director didn't stop. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look down. To him, the janitor was just a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently. Keanu felt a tightening in his chest. This wasn't just rudeness. This was dehumanization. A few minutes later, a young intern rushed in carrying a tray of coffees. She was struggling with the weight, balancing 4 cups and a bag of pastries. She tripped slightly on the mat near the door, stumbling. A few drops of coffee spilled onto the floor. "Watch it!" a passing executive barked at her. "If you ruin my shoes, you're paying for them." The girl looked like she was about to cry. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry," she stammered. The executive just rolled his eyes and kept walking. Keanu watched it all. He absorbed every insult, every dismissal, every moment of casual cruelty. It was a rot. A systemic, arrogant rot that had started at the head and infected the entire body of the organization. He realized with a heavy heart that the company he had built to tell stories about humanity had lost its own humanity completely. Upstairs, 12 floors above the plastic chair where Keanu sat, the atmosphere was very different. The boardroom of Paragon Studios was a masterpiece of intimidation. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the Los Angeles skyline, a visual reminder that the men inside looked down on the world. The other walls were lined with awards, Oscars, Golden Globes, Emmys, trophies that belonged to the artists, but were displayed here as conquests of management. At the center of the room sat a table made of reclaimed mahogany, long enough to seat 20 people. Currently, it was occupied by only 3 men. At the head of the table sat Julian Sterling, the CEO. Sterling was a man who had spent his entire life failing upward, a master of corporate politics who viewed creativity as a nuisance. He wore a custom-tailored suit and a Swiss watch that cost $50,000. His hair was silver, perfectly coiffed, and his smile was as bright as it was empty. To his right sat Marcus Vance, the CFO. Vance was younger, sharper, with the hungry, predatory eyes of a shark that smelled blood in the water. He was tapping a gold pen against the table, a nervous tick that betrayed his excitement. And pouring the drinks was Greg Prentice, the chief of staff, a man whose entire career was built on agreeing with whatever the most powerful person in the room said. He was the ultimate yes man, lacking a spine but possessing a very expensive education. "To the end of an era," Sterling announced, raising a crystal tumbler filled with 18-year-old single malt scotch. It was barely 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. "And the beginning of a massive payday," Vance added, clinking his glass against Sterling's. They drank, the amber liquid burning down their throats, fueling their hubris. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," Greg laughed nervously, wiping his mouth with a silk handkerchief. "Are you sure Reeves won't notice? The quarterly audit is next week. If the accountants dig too deep." Sterling waved his hand dismissively, leaning back in his leather chair. "Reeves, please. The man is a ghost. He's probably off shooting action movies in Europe or meditating in the desert somewhere. He hasn't looked at a detailed balance sheet in 6 years. He trusts us. That's his weakness. He thinks because he's a nice guy, the world plays by his rules. He thinks we're a family. By the time he realizes we've sold the intellectual property rights to Apex Media, the ink will be dry, the funds will be moved to the Cayman accounts, and we will be retired. It's brilliant, Vance smirked, opening a folder on the table. We strip the assets, the film library, the scripts, the distribution rights, transfer them to the shell company, and leave the studio with nothing but the debt and the overhead. The company declares bankruptcy in 6 months, the employees get laid off, the creditors fight over the scraps, and we walk away with $40 million each. $40 million, Greg whispered, the number rolling off his tongue like a prayer. That buys a lot of freedom. It's not just about the money, Sterling said, putting his feet up on the mahogany table, his heel digging into the expensive wood. It's about evolution. This studio, with its artistic integrity, and fair wages and community outreach, it's a dinosaur. It's weak. We're just helping it go extinct a little faster. We're doing the industry a favor, really. We're cutting out the dead weight. Downstairs, the 7 minutes were up. Keanu stood. He didn't check his phone. He didn't straighten his jacket. He didn't ask for permission. He simply began to walk. Tiffany, the receptionist, saw him moving toward the elevators out of the corner of her eye. She stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. Her face flushed with annoyance. Hey, sir. I told you to sit down. You can't go up there. Keanu didn't stop. He didn't run, but his stride was long and purposeful. He moved with the fluid grace of a man who had trained in martial arts for decades. He moved like water, unstoppable and silent. Security! Tiffany shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. 2 guards near the main entrance looked up, startled from their conversation. They saw the man in the beanie heading for the elevators. They started to move toward him, reaching for their belts, their faces setting into masks of authority. Sir. Stop right there. Freeze. Keanu reached the elevator bank just as the doors were sliding shut on an empty car. He slipped inside. The guards were 5 seconds too late. They hammered on the closed metal doors, shouting into their radios. Breach in the lobby. Unauthorized mail heading to the upper floors. Cut the power to the elevators. But it was too late. The car was already rising. Floor 2. Floor 5. Floor 8. Keanu watched the numbers climb on the digital display. He felt a calm, cold anger settling in his chest. It wasn't the fiery rage of an outburst, it was the geological pressure of a mountain about to shift. He wasn't just coming to fire people. He was coming to perform an exorcism. He thought of the janitor being stepped over. He thought of the intern being yelled at. He thought of the receptionist who had lost her compassion. The elevator chimed at the 12th floor. The doors slid open. The executive floor was silent, carpeted in plush wool that swallowed footsteps. The walls were lined with original artwork. It felt more like a private art gallery than an office. Keanu walked down the long corridor toward the double oak doors at the end. He could hear the laughter from inside. To 40 million, someone shouted. Keanu didn't knock. He placed his hand on the brass handle, turned it, and pushed the doors open with enough force that they slammed against the interior walls. Bang! The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. The laughter inside died instantly. Sterling dropped his feet from the table, his heel scratching the wood. Vance choked on his scotch, coughing violently. Greg jumped so hard he nearly knocked over the crystal bottle. They stared at the intruder. They saw the beanie. They saw the old jacket. They saw the dust on the boots. They saw a homeless man standing in their sanctuary. What the absolute hell? Sterling roared, recovering his voice first. His face turned a shade of crimson that matched his silk tie. How did you get past security? Who let you in? Keanu stood in the doorway, blocking the only exit. He didn't speak. He just looked at them. His dark eyes swept the room. He looked at the bottle of whiskey on the table. He looked at the feet marks on the mahogany. He looked at the fear masking itself as anger in their eyes. "I'm talking to you," Sterling shouted, standing up and buttoning his jacket, trying to regain his dominance. "Get out. This is a private meeting. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Do you have any idea whose office this is?" "Call the police," Vance hissed at Greg, his eyes darting to the door. "Now. Tell them we have a deranged intruder." Greg fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he dropped it. It clattered loudly on the floor, but nobody moved to pick it up. Keanu finally moved. He walked into the room. He didn't approach them aggressively, he just walked to the far end of the table, opposite Sterling. He pulled out the chair, the empty chair that had sat vacant for 6 years, the chair reserved for the majority shareholder. He sat down. The audacity of the move stunned them into silence. The air left the room. "You have 5 seconds to explain yourself before I physically throw you out that window," Sterling spat, veins bulging in his neck. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who we are? We run this town." Keanu reached up and hooked his thumbs under the rim of his beanie. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it off. He shook his head, his dark hair falling into place, framing the face that every person on the planet recognized. The beard was still there, but the eyes, those intense, soulful eyes, were unmistakable. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. It was the sound of a world ending. Sterling's mouth stayed open, but the words died in his throat. His jaw actually went slack. Vance went pale, his skin turning the color of ash. Greg looked like he was about to faint. "I know exactly who you are," Keanu said. His voice was quiet, raspy, but it carried a weight that filled every corner of the room. "You are Julian Sterling. You are Marcus Vance. And you are Greg Prentice." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "And I am the man who waited in your lobby for 7 minutes. I am the man who was told to use the service entrance. I am the man your receptionist threatened to have arrested because my jacket is old." Mr. Reeves," Sterling stammered. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, sweating terror. We didn't know. It's a disguise, right? For a role? We didn't know it was you. We would have rolled out the red carpet. We would have sent a car." "That is the problem," Keanu said, his voice hardening. "You treat the man in the suit like a king, and the man in the boots like garbage. You think respect is a transaction. You think dignity is something you only give to people who can do something for you." "It was a misunderstanding," Vance tried to interject, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "We've been under a lot of stress. The market is volatile. We're just trying to protect your investment. We were just strategizing." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket. The 3 executives flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Keanu pulled out a small, black digital recorder. He placed it on the table and pressed the play button. "Strip the assets, transfer them to the shell company, leave the studio with nothing but the debt, walk away with 40 million each." The recording played back their own words from just minutes ago. The audio quality was crystal clear. Sterling collapsed back into his chair. It was over. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a wax statue. "This isn't just bad management," Keanu said, turning off the recorder. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud. This is embezzlement. And this is a betrayal of every single person working in this building." Keanu stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. "When I started this company, I had one rule: we eat last. The leaders eat last. We make sure the crew is paid, the writers are respected, and the janitors have health insurance before we take a dime in profit. You turned my table into a feeding frenzy for yourselves. He turned back to them. His face was devoid of anger now, replaced by a cold disappointment. "You're fired." "You can't do that," Sterling whispered, clutching at straws, his voice trembling. "We have contracts. We have golden parachutes. If you fire us, you have to pay us severance. Tens of millions. It's in the bylaws." "Read your contracts again," Keanu said coldly. Clause 14, Section B. Gross misconduct and criminal conspiracy negate all severance packages and stock options. You aren't leaving with golden parachutes. You are leaving with nothing. No stock. No severance. No recommendations. Keanu pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Send them up." A moment later, the doors opened again. But it wasn't the incompetent lobby security. It was a team of federal agents in windbreakers, followed by a woman in a sharp gray suit, Keanu's personal attorney, and a man named Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne was the head of IT. He was wearing a Star Wars t-shirt and jeans. He was the one who had bugged the boardroom. He was the one who had sent Keanu the encrypted emails for months, warning him of the rot inside the company. "You knew," Sterling wheezed, looking at Elias with pure hatred. "You little rat." "I told you," Elias said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking slightly. "I told you 6 months ago that cutting the safety protocols and moving funds was illegal. You told me to shut up or I'd lose my pension. You told me I was expendable. So I called the owner. The agents moved in. Julian Sterling, Marcus Vance, Greg Prentice. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the only sound in the room. As the metal locked around Sterling's wrists, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. The beach in the Maldives was gone. The 40 million was gone. The reputation was gone. They were marched out of the boardroom, past Keanu, who didn't even look at them. He was looking at Elias. "Thank you," Keanu said to the IT director. "You saved this company." "I just did my job, sir," Elias replied humbly. "No," Keanu smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "You did the right thing when it was hard. That's leadership. Effective immediately, you are the interim chief operations officer." Elias's eyes went wide. "Sir, I fix computers. I don't know how to run a studio." "You know the difference between right and wrong," Keanu said. "That's the only qualification I care about right now. We can hire people to do the math. I need you to help me fix the soul of this place. Now, let's go downstairs. We have a lot of people to talk to." News of the arrests spread through the building like wildfire. By the time Keanu reached the ground floor atrium, hundreds of employees had gathered. They were whispering, anxious, terrified that the company was collapsing. They saw the police cars outside with their lights flashing. They saw their bosses being shoved into the back of squad cars. Keanu walked into the center of the atrium. He climbed up onto a small stone riser near the decorative fountain. He was still wearing the beanie and the old jacket. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like one of them. "Can I have your attention, please?" he asked. His voice wasn't amplified, but the acoustics of the lobby carried it to everyone. The room went deathly silent. Every eye was fixed on him. "My name is Keanu. And I own this company." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Many of them had never seen him in person. They whispered to each other, confirming the rumors. "I know you are scared," he continued, his tone empathetic. "You saw men in handcuffs. You are wondering if you have a job tomorrow. You are wondering if your paycheck will clear. You are wondering if this ship is sinking." He paused, making eye contact with the intern who had spilled the coffee earlier. She was standing in the front row, clutching her tray. "The men who ran this company are gone. They were fired because they forgot the most important rule of business. A company is not a building, and it is not a bank account. A company is people. It is you. They wanted to sell this studio. They wanted to strip it down and leave you with nothing. That is not going to happen. A wave of relief washed over the crowd, so palpable it felt like a change in air pressure. Shoulders dropped. Tears appeared in eyes. People grabbed each other's hands. But we have work to do, Keanu said, his voice becoming firmer. I walked into this lobby 40 minutes ago, and I was treated like an intruder because of my clothes. I saw managers screaming at assistants. I saw a culture of fear. That ends today. He pointed to the reception desk, where Tiffany was hiding behind her monitor, terrified she was next. She shrank back as everyone looked at her. We are going to start over, Keanu said. From now on, there are no reserved parking spots. There are no executive dining rooms. If I am in the building, I eat in the cafeteria with you. If there is a problem, my door is open. And we are going to institute a new policy. Respect is mandatory. Hierarchy is not. He jumped down from the riser and walked straight over to the janitor, the same elderly man he had seen being stepped over earlier. The man, whose name was Henry, looked nervous, clutching his mop like a shield. Keanu stopped in front of him. He extended his hand. I'm Keanu. What's your name? Henry, sir, the man stammered, looking at Keanu's hand, then wiping his own hand on his uniform before shaking it. Henry, Keanu said, loud enough for the room to hear. I noticed the floor in the lobby is spotless. You do excellent work. Thank you for making this place shine. Henry smiled, a broad, beaming smile that lit up his tired face. Tears welled in his eyes. Thank you, sir. Nobody has said that in a long time. The applause started slowly. One person, then two. Then it built into a roar. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic applause of a corporate event. It was the raucous, emotional cheering of people who had felt invisible for years, finally being seen. It was the sound of hope returning. In the weeks that followed, Paragon Studios changed. The fancy sculptures in the lobby were sold at auction, and the money was used to fund a daycare center for employees' children and a scholarship fund for junior staff. The executive washrooms were opened to everyone. The dress code was abolished. The air in the building changed. It no longer smelled like ozone and money. It smelled like coffee and creativity. But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, Julian Sterling and his cronies were facing trial. The evidence was overwhelming. They were looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. Their high-priced lawyers were begging for a plea deal, but the district attorney was out for blood. Then, Keanu Reeves made a phone call. He asked for a meeting with the prosecutors and the defendants. They met in a quiet room at the courthouse. Sterling looked like a ghost of his former self. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was messy, the silver roots showing. He wore an orange jumpsuit that was far cheaper than the suit he had worn in the boardroom. Mr. Reeves, Sterling said, his voice trembling as he sat across from the man he had tried to rob. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I am. I ruined my life for nothing. Keanu looked at him. He didn't see a monster. He saw a man who had lost his way, consumed by greed and insecurity. He saw a man broken by his own ego. I don't want you to go to prison, Keanu said softly. Sterling looked up, shocked. The lawyers froze. What? Prison will just make you bitter, Keanu continued. It will teach you how to survive among criminals, but it won't teach you how to be human. I have a different proposal. Keanu slid a document across the table. I will drop the civil charges. I will ask the DA to suspend the criminal sentence to probation. But on 3 conditions. Sterling nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Anything. I'll do anything. Condition 1, Keanu said, holding up a finger. You will return every cent of the bonuses you took in the last 5 years. That money will go into a hardship fund for the staff you tried to fire. Done, Sterling said. Take it all. Condition 2. You are banned from holding an executive position in any public company for life. I understand, Sterling whispered. And condition 3, Keanu leaned in, his eyes locking onto Sterling's. "You have to work." "Work?" Sterling asked, confused. "You mean a job?" "There is a homeless shelter on 6th Street, Keanu said. "The Midnight Mission. They serve 3,000 meals a day to people who have nothing. People who are invisible to men like you. You, Marcus, and Greg will volunteer there for 2,000 hours. You will scrub the pots. You will mop the floors. You will look the people you serve in the eye, and you will learn that they are just as important as you are." Sterling stared at Keanu. He realized this wasn't just a punishment, it was a lifeline. It was a chance to find his own humanity again. "I'll do it," Sterling choked out. "Thank you. Thank you." 6 months later, a documentary crew was filming at the Midnight Mission. They were covering the crisis of homelessness in Los Angeles. In the background of one of the shots, blurred and out of focus, was a man with silver hair. He was wearing an apron stained with soup. He was scrubbing a large metal pot, sweating, his expensive manicure long gone. He looked tired. He looked older. But for the first time in decades, he looked peaceful. Back at Paragon Studios, Keanu walked through the lobby. Tiffany, the receptionist, was still there. She hadn't been fired. Keanu believed in second chances, too. She had changed. She greeted everyone by name now. She smiled. "Good morning, Keanu," she said, waving. "Good morning, Tiffany," he replied. "How is your mom doing?" "Much better, thanks for asking. That specialist you recommended is amazing." Keanu waved and headed for the elevators. He was wearing a suit today, not to show off, but because he had a meeting with investors to explain why profits were down, but happiness was up. He stepped into the elevator, standing next to a young intern carrying a stack of scripts. "Here, let me hold the door," Keanu said, pressing the button. The intern smiled. "Thanks, boss." The doors closed, and the elevator rose. This story isn't just about a famous actor or a corrupt CEO. It's a mirror. It asks us a simple question that we have to answer every single day, in every interaction we have. When you look at a stranger, what do you see? Do you see a resume? Do you see a net worth? Do you see a suit or a hoodie? Or do you see a human being? Keanu Reeves didn't fire his executives because they made a mistake with money. He fired them because they made a mistake with their souls. They forgot that you can tell the character of a person not by how they treat the people who can help them, but by how they treat the people who can't. Arrogance is a fragile mask. It cracks the moment power is taken away. But humility is armor. It survives the hard times, and it keeps you grounded in the good times. So the next time you walk past someone you think is unimportant, the janitor, the waiter, the person on the street, remember this story. Remember that the man in the worn-out jacket might own the building. And even if he doesn't, he still owns his dignity. And that alone deserves your respect. Because in the end, we all leave this world the same way we entered it, with nothing in our pockets, judged only by the love we gave and the kindness we showed. Don't wait for a billionaire to walk into your workplace to teach you that lesson. Be the leader you wish you had. Treat everyone like a CEO, and you might just find that the world treats you a little differently too.